Hi guys, so we're going to finish off our geometry review today and just talking about how to find some different values with the calculator. Most of what we're going to do in class is actually just going to be some trig word problem applications, but I'm not going to need to go over that in the video because we really talked about that yesterday. The only thing that's new for today that this video is going to be about is how to find our reciprocal functions using the calculator. Because you may have noticed your calculator doesn't have a cotangent or a cosecant or a secant button on it. So the first thing we're going to look at is just the cosine of 39 degrees. So if I wanted to evaluate the cosine of 39 degrees, I would just go to my calculator, make sure my mode is in radians in this case, or sorry, make sure my mode is in degrees, wow, radians is next week. I want to make sure my mode is in degrees, and as long as I'm there, I can just type in the cosine of 39, and it gives me my value, no problem. But the problem is when I look at something like the cotangent of 39 degrees. So I don't have a cotangent button. What I have is a tangent button and a tangent inverse button. An inverse is not what we're going to use for cotangent because tangent inverse is a different operation. It's not the reciprocal. So what we remember from yesterday is that cotangent is the same thing as 1 divided by tangent. So that's how we're going to type this into our calculator. We're going to type this in as 1 divided by the tangent of 39 degrees. So in order to find the cotangent of 39, I'm just going to type in 1 divided by the tangent of 39. And that's my cotangent value. Now it's pretty simple when it stays like that. The only time it gets tricky is when we actually start to look at inverses. So this first one, it tells me that the sine of theta is equal to 0.308. We solved questions like this yesterday, so we know that in order to actually evaluate this, this is a case where we would type this in as sine inverse 0.308. Inverse is the operation that we use in order to find an angle as an answer. So if we're looking for an angle, then we're going to use inverse. Now that can be written and formatted a couple different ways. Both sine of theta is equal to a value is one way to do it, or sine inverse is one way. You also may see something called arc sine. And arc sine just means the same thing as inverse. So I could do arc sine 0.308, and that means the exact same thing as sine inverse. Those two things are equivalent. So arc sine means inverse. And again, in order to figure this out, similar to what we did yesterday, I would just go to my calculator and type secant sine 0.308. And I'd get my value, so I know that would be 18 degrees. That means that the sine of 18 degrees should be about 0.308. It's off a little bit because of rounding, but you get the idea. The only time this gets difficult, like we said, is when we're dealing with an inverse and a reciprocal. So cosecant of theta. In order to actually solve that, the cosecant of theta is equal to 1.05. What I cannot do here, I cannot just say 1 divided by sine inverse of 1.507. And you guys will notice, if you go ahead and type that in your calculator, you're going to see what happens when I do that. If I type in sine inverse of 1.507, I get an error. The reason for that, what's actually happening there, that means sine inverse means tell me the angle where I get a sine value of 1.5. The reason that can't happen, if you think about that, sine is the ratio of the opposite of a triangle over the hypotenuse. So if that were to be true, the sine of theta would be 1.5. That means that theta would have to be an angle where the opposite is 3 and the hypotenuse is 2. Is it possible for the opposite to ever be bigger than the hypotenuse? And I think we know that our hypotenuse has to be the biggest side. Therefore, it's impossible for a sine value or for a cosine value to ever be greater than 1. Now, a tangent value, that's okay because we don't deal with a hypotenuse. We just deal with opposite and adjacent. But a sine value and a cosine value will never be greater than 1. Now, what that means, it tells us that we put this in our calculator incorrectly. And we did because, again, we have to realize we're dealing with a different operation here. I'm going to be doing sine inverse of something is going to give me theta. And there's a reciprocal involved here. What I want the reciprocal of is not the reciprocal of the angle. Okay, what I want is the reciprocal of the ratio. So I want the reciprocal of 1.507. So I'm going to type this in as 1 divided by 1.507 inside the parentheses. And the way I usually remember this is if I'm doing a reciprocal function, if I do an inverse, the 1 divided by goes inside the parentheses. If it's an inverse, it's inside the parentheses. Okay, the inverse, the 1 divided by is inside the parentheses. So to find this value, I would just type this in as sine inverse 1 divided by 1.507. And that gives me my answer. So the cosecant of 41.6 degrees would give me a value of 1.507. And I can double check my answer if I needed to. So again, we said the cosecant of, now I just forgot my answer from the calculator, the cosecant of 41.6 degrees should equal 1.507. So all I have to do then is type in 1 divided by sine 41.6. I should get 1.507 to check my answer. So let's see, 1 divided by sine, because again I'm working backwards here and checking my answer, of 41.6, and I get that value. Alright, so the most difficult thing here again is just remembering I'm using inverse to find an angle, and I just need to know the 1 divided by deals with the ratio, not with the angle. And we're going to do some practice with this tomorrow in class, but we're also going to do some more word problems to get some extra trig practice tomorrow. So if you have any questions, come ready with them.